Welcome. Today we look back at one of the most defining events in human history, World War II. This was a conflict that reshaped nations, transformed societies, and changed the role of the United States in the world forever. What follows is not a story of heroes and villains alone, but a record of decisions, sacrifices, and consequences that continue to shape our present. This is the story of World War II. Fire without faces. In World War II, American artillerymen fought a war measured not in meters gained, but in seconds saved. They did not charge hills or clear rooms. They rarely saw the enemy. Yet their fire shaped every battlefield the United States fought on. When infantry stalled, artillery opened the way. When tanks were pinned, artillery broke the trap. When a line threatened to collapse, artillery held it together. American artillery doctrine emphasized speed, accuracy, and coordination. Guns were tools. The real weapon was the system behind them. Forward observers at the front spotted targets and called fire. Radios carried coordinates to fire direction centers. Calculations were made in seconds. Guns adjusted. Shells flew. The entire chain worked only if every link performed under pressure. Artillerymen lived close to danger, but rarely in the spotlight. Gun crews worked in muddy pits, forests, fields, and ruins. They dug positions, camouflaged guns, and waited. When fire missions came, there was no hesitation. Breaches slammed, rounds were lifted and loaded, commands were shouted over explosions. The ground shook as batteries fired in unison. The physical labor was brutal. Shells weighed dozens of pounds. Crews lifted, rammed, and ejected casings for hours. Ears rang, hands blistered, sweat mixed with cordite and dirt. Rest came in fragments between missions, often on cold ground beside the guns. When counter-battery fire came, artillerymen took cover and returned to work immediately after the last shell landed. Accuracy mattered because proximity mattered. American artillery often fired danger close, shells landing near friendly troops to stop enemy assaults. Forward observers adjusted fire by meters. A mistake could kill Americans. Precision saved lives. Trust between infantry and artillery was absolute. When soldiers called for fire, they believed it would land where needed and nowhere else. The enemy understood the threat. German units hunted artillery positions relentlessly. Counter-battery fire searched for muzzle flashes and sound. Aircraft strafed gun lines. Shelling turned quiet positions into chaos without warning. Artillerymen suffered casualties even while far from the front, because the front came to them. Yet American artillery adapted. Guns displaced quickly. Positions changed often. Camouflage improved. Communications tightened. The system became faster than the enemy's ability to respond. When one battery moved, another fired. Fire never stopped. In Europe and the Pacific alike, artillery fire defined the rhythm of combat. Barrages shattered defenses before assaults. Defensive fires broke counterattacks. Night fires disrupted movement and morale. Soldiers learned the sound of friendly guns and took comfort in it. The phrase, "steel rain," was not poetry. It was relief. Artillerymen rarely knew the results of their work in the moment. They fired at grid coordinates, not faces. Later they heard reports. A road denied, a ridge taken, an attack broken. The distance between cause and effect was part of the burden. The work was necessary and impersonal. This was the artilleryman's war, precise, relentless, and decisive. A war of calculations under fire. A war where victory arrived as silence when the enemy stopped moving. And this was only the beginning. Training the system. Speed, radios, and the science of fire. American artillery did not become decisive by accident. It was built deliberately as a system, not a collection of guns. From the first days of training, artillerymen learned that speed and coordination mattered more than individual strength or heroics. A gun crew was only as effective as the network that connected it to the front. Training emphasized repetition under pressure. Crews drilled loading, aiming, firing, and displacing until movements became automatic. Fire direction centers practiced calculations relentlessly, converting grid coordinates, weather data, and observer adjustments into firing solutions in seconds. Errors were corrected harshly because mistakes in combat would be fatal to friendly troops. Radios were the lifeline. Forward observers trained with infantry units, moving with platoons and companies at the front. They learned how to spot targets through smoke, rain, and darkness, and how to describe them precisely. A good observer did not just call fire. He anticipated enemy movement and requested it before infantry stalled. His voice over the radio could decide whether an attack lived or died. Artillery units practiced time-on-target missions, multiple batteries firing so shells arrived simultaneously, overwhelming defenses before the enemy could take cover. This required precise synchronization across distances and units. When it worked, the effect was devastating. Defenders were struck all at once, disoriented, and unable to respond. Training also emphasized displacement. Guns that stayed too long in one place died. Crews learned to tear down positions quickly, move under cover, and reestablish fire elsewhere. Camouflage mattered. Noise discipline mattered. A battery that revealed itself invited counter-battery fire. Survival depended on moving faster than the enemy could react. Logistics were inseparable from training. Ammunition supply determined firepower. Crews learned to manage stockpiles, prioritize missions, and conserve shells when necessary. Trucks moved constantly, often under fire, delivering rounds by the thousands. Without this flow, even the best trained battery fell silent. The science of fire included weather, terrain, and timing. Wind altered trajectories. Temperature changed propellant behavior. Rain and snow affected visibility and movement. Artillerymen learned to factor these variables quickly, trusting calculations under conditions where intuition could mislead. Infantry-artillery integration was drilled relentlessly. Soldiers learned how to call for fire, how to mark positions, and how to stay clear of impact zones. Trust grew from experience. Infantry knew artillery would respond quickly. Artillery knew infantry would give accurate information. This trust allowed commanders to take risks that would otherwise be impossible. Training prepared artillerymen for emotional distance. They would fire on coordinates without seeing results. They would deliver destruction without faces. This detachment was necessary to function. Yet it also carried weight. Artillerymen understood that every shell mattered, that every adjustment could save or end lives. By the time American forces entered sustained combat, the artillery system was fast, flexible, and resilient. Losses were absorbed, guns were replaced, crews rotated. The network continued to function even when parts were damaged. This redundancy became a decisive advantage. The system was ready. What remained was to test it under fire, across beaches, forests, cities, and jungles, where seconds mattered and mistakes echoed immediately. And that testing would come soon. Normandy, and the first great test of Fire Normandy, was the first moment when American artillery faced a problem of scale unlike anything before. The landings demanded fire support precise enough to protect infantry on open beaches and powerful enough to break fortified defenses built over years. Artillerymen understood the stakes clearly. If the guns failed, the beaches would become killing grounds with no escape. In the hours before dawn, on June 6, 1944, American artillery units prepared in darkness. Naval gunfire thundered offshore, but land-based artillery would soon take over, providing sustained fire as troops pushed inland. Guns were positioned quickly on makeshift sites, often before the beachhead was fully secure. Crews worked under sporadic fire, digging pits, aligning pieces, and establishing communications, while infantry fought only hundreds of meters away. As the first waves stalled on the beaches, calls for fire flooded in. Forward observers, often pinned down with infantry units, requested immediate support. Artillery responded with danger-close fire, shells landing near friendly positions to suppress machine guns and bunkers that had halted movement. The margin for error was terrifyingly small. Crews trusted calculations completely, knowing that hesitation would cost lives. Hedgerow terrain complicated everything once forces moved inland. Fields were enclosed by thick earthen banks that absorbed blasts and limited visibility. Enemy positions were difficult to identify. Observers adjusted fire constantly, walking shells forward meter by meter. Artillery became the primary tool for breaking resistance that infantry could not approach safely. German counter-battery fire tested American artillery discipline. Enemy guns searched for muzzle flashes and sound signatures, firing blindly into suspected positions. Crews learned to fire short missions and displace immediately. Guns were moved under cover of smoke and darkness, often multiple times a day. Fatigue set in quickly, but the pace did not slow. Coordination proved decisive. Infantry, armor, engineers, and artillery operated as a single system. When tanks were halted by obstacles, artillery suppressed enemy anti-tank guns. When infantry advanced, artillery shifted fire forward seamlessly. When German units attempted counterattacks, defensive fires broke formations before they could gain momentum. Casualties among artillery units were real and sobering. Counter-battery fire landed without warning. Air attacks struck gun lines. Shell fragments tore through pits and crews alike. Medics treated wounds beside the guns while fire missions continued. The work did not stop because stopping meant silence, and silence meant the enemy could move. By the end of the Normandy campaign, American artillery had proven its value decisively. The system held under pressure. Communications functioned despite chaos. Fire arrived when needed and shifted when ordered. Infantry learned to rely on it completely. German units learned to fear it. Normandy was not won by artillery alone. But without artillery, it could not have been won at all. The beaches were crossed. The hedgerows were breached. The door into France stood open. The next phase would demand even more: longer ranges, faster responses, and sustained pressure as the war moved across Europe. And the guns would move with it, breaking counterattacks, artillery as a shield. As Allied forces pushed inland after Normandy, German resistance shifted from static defense to aggressive counterattacks. These were not symbolic gestures. They were calculated attempts to exploit moments of transition when units were moving, supply lines stretched, or terrain forced bottlenecks. In these moments, American artillery became less a weapon of advance and more a shield, absorbing the shock meant for infantry and armor. German counterattacks often came suddenly. Infantry emerged from forests at dawn. Armor struck at dusk. Columns moved under cover of rain or fog. Forward observers learned to read signs of movement before contact, engine noise, dust, changes in radio traffic. When they identified a forming attack, they did not wait. They called for fire immediately. Defensive fire missions demanded speed above all else. Batteries shifted from planned schedules to immediate response. Fire direction centers calculated rapidly, sometimes skipping refinements to get shells in the air faster. The goal was disruption. Break formations, slow momentum, force attackers to take cover before they could close with friendly lines. Artillerymen learned to fire concentrations and box fires, trapping enemy units within overlapping zones of impact. Roads and forest edges became death corridors. German units advancing confidently moments earlier found themselves pinned, disoriented, and bleeding before they could engage directly. Many counterattacks collapsed without ever reaching American lines. The psychological effect was decisive. Infantry under attack felt the ground shake as friendly shells landed forward of their positions. This sound meant survival. Soldiers later said that hearing American artillery during a counterattack was like feeling a hand placed firmly on their shoulder. Reassurance that they were not alone. German forces adapted, attempting to infiltrate at night or disperse widely. Artillery adapted in response. Illumination rounds lit up darkness, exposing movement. Harassing fire disrupted assembly areas. Guns fired at irregular intervals to deny rest and coordination. Even when not killing, artillery exhausted the enemy and eroded morale. Counter-battery threats intensified. German gunners attempted to silence American batteries before launching attacks. Artillery units responded with displacement drills perfected under pressure. Guns fired, moved, and fired again from new positions. Decoy fires and smoke-masked movements. Survival depended on staying unpredictable. Weather added complexity. Rain softened ground, altering trajectories. Fog limited observation. Snow muffled movement. Fire direction centers adjusted continuously, trusting calculations when visibility vanished. Artillerymen learned that their effectiveness could not depend on clear sight. It depended on the system functioning regardless of conditions. Coordination with armor and infantry deepened. Tanks held ground, while artillery shattered attacking formations. Infantry advanced immediately after fire lifted, exploiting confusion. Engineers repaired routes under cover of suppressive fire. The shield did not just stop attacks. It enabled counter-movement. Casualties among artillery units continued. Counter-battery fire landed unexpectedly. Shell fragments struck pits. Crews replaced fallen comrades instantly and returned to work. The mission did not pause. Defensive fire saved lives elsewhere, and that knowledge sustained crews through loss. By late summer and autumn 1944, German counterattacks lost their effectiveness. They were anticipated, detected, and broken by artillery before gaining traction. The shield held repeatedly, allowing Allied momentum to continue despite local reverses. Artillery had proven it could do more than open doors. It could hold the line when everything else was under strain. As the war moved toward winter, and the enemy prepared one final gamble, artillery would face its greatest defensive test yet, one where holding mattered more than advancing. The Ardennes. Fire in the snow. The winter of 1944 to 1945 tested American artillery more severely than any previous campaign. When German forces launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, the battlefield was defined by snow, forest, fog, and confusion. Visibility vanished. Roads froze. Units were cut off. In these conditions, artillery became the difference between collapse and survival. The attack came fast. German units punched through thinly held sectors, overrunning positions and driving deep into Allied lines. Communications failed. Supply routes were severed. Infantry units found themselves isolated and under strength. Forward observers often lost contact with headquarters and had to operate independently, calling fire with incomplete information and trusting instinct as much as maps. Snow and fog grounded air support. Tanks struggled on icy roads. Infantry moved slowly through forests where sound carried unpredictably. Artillery, however, could still reach out beyond the weather. Guns fired by calculation rather than sight, delivering fire into forests, crossroads, and assembly areas the enemy relied on. Defensive fire during the Ardennes demanded precision under extreme stress. Ammunition was rationed. Guns fired with gloved hands numbed by cold. Breaches froze. Crews worked through the night, chipping ice from equipment and digging positions in frozen ground. Rest was almost non-existent. The guns did not stop because the enemy did not stop. Artillery played a critical role in holding key towns and road junctions, especially around Bastogne. Forward observers embedded with surrounded units called for fire at dangerously close distances. Shells landed just beyond American lines, shattering German assaults before they could break through. These missions required absolute trust between observer and battery, between calculation and reality. German forces attempted to silence artillery through infiltration and counter-battery fire. Patrols moved through forests, targeting gun positions. Artillery units defended themselves as infantry when necessary, forming perimeter defenses around guns. Crews alternated between firing missions and repelling attacks, sometimes within the same hour. The psychological effect of artillery in the Ardennes was profound. For American infantry, the sound of outgoing fire meant hope. For German attackers, it meant sudden chaos. Assaults that began with confidence dissolved into confusion under steel rain. Units were forced to halt, regroup, or withdraw, losing momentum they could not afford. As weather slowly improved, coordination increased. Artillery worked with armor and infantry to regain lost ground. Fire plans became more aggressive. Counterattacks were broken before reaching full strength. The German offensive stalled and then collapsed under sustained pressure. The Ardennes proved that artillery could function as both weapon and lifeline. When mobility failed and visibility vanished, fire remained. The system held under conditions that punished every weakness. Calculations replaced sight. Discipline replaced speed. Endurance replaced comfort. For artillerymen, the Ardennes was a battle against cold as much as the enemy. Many later said it was the hardest period of the war, not because of constant movement, but because the guns had to keep firing no matter how miserable the conditions became. When the German offensive ended, American artillery stood intact, battered, but effective. The shield had held. Now the war would move forward again, out of the forests and toward the heart of Germany, where artillery would shift once more from defense to relentless pressure. Rolling fire, advancing across Germany. When the Ardennes offensive collapsed, the war shifted decisively in Allied favor. The advance into Germany was no longer tentative. It was deliberate, sustained, and relentless. For American artillerymen, this phase demanded a change in posture, from holding the line under pressure to rolling fire forward in support of constant movement. Artillery units leapfrogged across the landscape. One battery fired while another displaced. As infantry and armor advanced, guns followed closely, establishing new positions within range of the next objectives. The rhythm became continuous. Fire, move, fire again. The front did not pause, and neither could the artillery. River crossings multiplied as forces approached the Rhine and beyond. Artillery prepared crossings with intense preparatory fires, suppressing enemy positions on far banks, while engineers worked. Once bridges were secured, guns crossed quickly to maintain pressure. Delays were unacceptable. A gap in fire coverage could invite counterattack or allow enemy units to escape. Urban areas demanded careful fire planning. Cities offered cover and concealment to defenders, but also sheltered civilians. Artillery adjusted tactics, using precision fires to isolate strong points rather than blanket destruction. Forward observers worked closer to the front than ever, calling corrections by tens of meters. The risk of friendly casualties remained high, but disciplined coordination reduced it. German resistance became fragmented yet dangerous. Isolated units fought from towns, factories, and forests. Artillery targeted these pockets systematically, denying movement and breaking cohesion. Harassing fire at night prevented regrouping. Roads and rail junctions were interdicted to cut off retreat. The goal was not dramatic breakthroughs, but attrition without respite. Counter-battery threats diminished as German artillery ran short of ammunition and coordination. Still, American gunners remained cautious. Positions changed frequently. Camouflage and noise discipline continued. Experience had taught them never to assume the enemy was finished. Logistics strained under the pace. Ammunition consumption was enormous. Trucks ran constantly, often under fire or through damaged roads. Artillery units managed stock carefully, prioritizing missions that directly supported movement. When supplies lagged, fire plans adapted. Fewer rounds, tighter timing, greater reliance on observer accuracy. The human cost persisted. Casualties continued from mines, stray shells, and accidents. Fatigue accumulated. Crews slept in fragments beside their guns, waking to missions at all hours. Yet morale held. The direction of the war was clear. Each move forward reduced the space in which the enemy could operate. As American forces crossed the Rhine, the psychological shift was palpable. The barrier that had symbolized Germany's last natural defense fell quickly under coordinated fire and engineering. Beyond it, organized resistance unraveled. Surrenders increased. Columns of prisoners moved west. Artillery adapted again. Less to break assaults, more to seal pockets and prevent escape. By April 1945, the advance became a series of closures. Artillery boxed in enemy units, cut routes, and forced capitulation without costly frontal attacks. The guns did not seek glory. They sought efficiency. Fire was applied where it saved the most lives by ending fights sooner. For artillerymen, the rolling fire across Germany was proof of the system's maturity. What began as training drills and calculations under pressure had become an instrument capable of shaping entire campaigns. Precision, speed, and coordination, honed through Normandy and the Ardennes, now delivered decisive results. The war was nearing its end. The guns continued to fire, but the purpose had changed. Each mission shortened the conflict by hours or days. Each silence after impact signaled ground taken without further bloodshed. One chapter remains. What happened when the guns finally fell silent, and what this unseen war left behind. Silence after thunder. The end of the war. When the war finally ended, the change was not marked by a final barrage or a triumphant salute from the guns. It arrived quietly. For American artillerymen, men who had lived by alarms, coordinates, and the violent rhythm of fire, the sudden absence of sound was unsettling. The ground no longer shook. Radios carried no urgent calls. Calculations stopped mid-routine. The thunder they had relied on vanished. News of surrender reached units unevenly. Some heard it through crackling radios during routine maintenance. Others learned when officers gathered them beside guns that had fired only hours earlier. Reactions were restrained. Relief came first, heavy and physical. Men sat on ammunition crates, leaned against trails, or lay on the ground, exhausted beyond celebration. The work did not end immediately. Artillery units secured positions, guarded prisoners, and supported occupation forces. There were still dangers: mines, unexploded ordnance, accidental discharges. Casualties did not cease the moment hostilities stopped. Gunners continued to move cautiously, habits ingrained by months of danger. Guns were cleaned and covered, ammunition was inventoried, positions were dismantled methodically. For many crews, this was harder than firing. The routine of maintenance without the urgency of combat felt hollow. The guns had been companions, tools that defined purpose. Now they were silent metal. Artillerymen began to process what had happened. During the war, there had been no time to think about consequences. Now memory returned. Coordinates became places. Fire missions became images. Roads denied, towns shattered, assaults broken. Many gunners wondered about the unseen effects of their work. The distance that had made the job possible now carried weight. Demobilization followed slowly. Units were thinned. Crews were separated by orders and schedules. Men who had trusted each other implicitly exchanged brief goodbyes. There were no speeches that fit. A handshake, a nod, a shared glance toward the guns. These were enough. Returning home brought another adjustment. Civilian life moved at a different pace. Noise felt different. Silence felt louder. Many artillerymen found it difficult to explain their war. "I fired when told" did not capture the responsibility of danger-close missions or the trust placed in calculations under fire. Many chose not to try. Some artillerymen carried their skills into civilian trades, engineering, construction, surveying. Others sought work far removed from noise and machinery. All carried habits shaped by the war: attention to detail, respect for procedure, an instinct to prepare for worse cases. The guns that had shaped battles were eventually stored, scrapped, or replaced. Fields returned to quiet. Roads reopened. Life resumed. Yet for those who served the guns, the memory of thunder lingered, a reminder of a time when seconds and numbers decided survival. The end of the war did not erase the artilleryman's experience. It reframed it. One chapter remains: what this war of fire without faces meant, and why it still matters. Legacy of American Artillerymen. The legacy of the American artilleryman in World War II is found where battles ended sooner than expected. It is found in assaults that did not have to be made, counterattacks that never reached friendly lines, and roads that stayed open because enemy movement was denied. Artillery did not seek recognition. It sought results. The first legacy was speed over spectacle. American artillery proved that the fastest system wins, not the loudest gun. Forward observers, radios, fire direction centers, and trained crews turned requests into impacts in minutes, sometimes seconds. This speed saved lives. Infantry learned that when they called, fire would come. That trust changed how units fought. The second legacy was precision under pressure. Danger close was not a slogan. It was a daily reality. Artillerymen learned to deliver fire close enough to protect friendly troops without harming them. Calculations were checked, rechecked, and executed under stress. The ability to place shells exactly where needed became a defining advantage across Europe and the Pacific. The third legacy was integration. Artillery did not operate in isolation. It worked with infantry, armor, engineers, and air support as part of a single system. When tanks stalled, artillery suppressed anti-tank guns. When infantry held under attack, artillery broke formations. When engineers built crossings, artillery shielded them. This combined arms approach shaped modern warfare long after the war ended. The fourth legacy was endurance without visibility. Artillerymen fought a war where the enemy often had no face. They fired at coordinates, not silhouettes. This distance made the work possible, but it also carried weight. Many gunners later reflected on the responsibility of unseen effects. That reflection informed a culture of discipline and restraint that endured into peacetime service. On a human level, artillerymen carried habits forged under fire: preparation, redundancy, and respect for procedure. These habits translated into civilian life, into engineering, construction, logistics, and leadership. The quiet competence learned beside the guns rebuilt a world that had been shattered by them. The war also advanced the science of fire. Techniques developed in World War II, time on target, rapid displacement, integrated communications, became foundations of post-war doctrine. Modern artillery, with its precision and coordination, traces a direct line to the lessons learned by crews working in mud, snow, and smoke. Artillerymen rarely appeared in photographs of victory. Their success was measured in absence: the absence of enemy movement, the absence of counterattacks, the absence of stalled advances. When nothing happened, it often meant the guns had done their work. World War II ended with American artillery silent across 2 continents. What remained was a standard: fire delivered quickly, precisely, and in service of the soldier at the front. That standard saved lives then and continues to shape how wars are fought now. The artilleryman's war was not about seeing the enemy fall. It was about ensuring that others did not. And in that purpose, the thunder spoke for itself. World War II reshaped the world we live in today. Its victories, losses, and lessons remind us of the cost of global conflict and the value of cooperation. By remembering this history, we honor those who lived through it and better understand the world they left behind. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.